Assalamu alaikum, dear students. How are you? Hope you are fine and trying heart and soul to keep away coronavirus from your life. Regarding your existence, better existence in this world or in Bangladesh. So you have to maintain certain rules and regulation, as I said before, to use mask, to keep social distance or physical distance, whatsoever it is needed for you to live a healthy life. So today I am going to take third class on Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I am going to discuss about major characters. Now I will focus on Marlow first. Before that, I have to say both Marlow and Kurtz, two major characters, cover almost 50% of the whole novel, The Heart of Darkness, because all the characters tell about them. So first, come to Marlow or Charlie Marlow. Though the first two-thirds of Heart of Darkness, despite the curiosity about Kurtz, the main character is not Kurtz at all, but Marlow. We find less about Kurtz than about his effect on Marlow's life. Heart of Darkness is an allegory, Marlow's spiritual journey to some extent, a voyage of discovery and self-discovery. It seems reasonable to assume that Marlow is Conrad's stand-in. Marlow was born in England. Not in Poland, and he never gave up sailing. But otherwise, the difference between Marlow and Conrad is not striking. And we know that The Heart of Darkness, especially, is its first half, is heavily autobiographical. Marlow tends to keep his own counsel. He is always observing and judging. So move to chapter 1 now and go to page 3, 4, 5, and 6 of chapter 1. You can see it on the screen. I would like to quote from the text. And it has a fascination too that goes to work upon him. The fascination of the abomination, you know. Imagine the growing regrets, the longing to escape, the powerless disgust, the surrender, the hate. The conquest of the art, when mostly means the taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing. When you look into it too much, what redeems it is the idea only. And page number 6, if you look at, you will find Marlow keep continuing like that. I don't want to bother you much with what happened to me personally. He began, showing in his remark of weakness of many tellers of tales. Then he continues, it was the furthest point of navigation and the culminating point of my experience. It seemed somehow to throw a kind of light on everything about me and into my thoughts. So, Marlow observed and judged, or keep judging his own experience as the novel progresses. But his politeness covers up the harshness of his judgment and encourages others to speak their minds, as at the very beginning of the novel, the first narrator introduced Marlow. Now, move to few former pages, like page number 1 of chapter 1. He resembles a pilot, which to a seaman is trustworthiness personified. It was difficult to realize his work was not out there in the luminous estuary, but behind him, within the brooding gloom. Then page number 2 of chapter 2. Marlow sat cross-legged, leaning against the mizzen-mast. He had sunken cheeks, a yellow complexion, a straight back, an ascetic aspect, and with his arms dropped, the palms of hands outwards, resembled an idol. He was the only man of us who still followed the sea. The worst that could be said of him was that he had not represented his class. He was a seaman, but he was a wanderer too. While most seamen had, if one may so express it, a sedentary life. So you can understand actually how the other characters see Marlow as a sailor or as a seaman. The difference between Marlow and another sailor is very evident here. Actually, other narrators' observation or thinking reveals Marlow's character amidst that politeness. So come to the next page. You can see it on the screen. I am going slowly because I think it would be easier for you, more easier for you to write down if you need to. Marlow is a wanderer, an explorer, a discoverer. The seas or oceans couldn't pacify his thirst for unknown places of art. He tells us the experiences of his own life to the fellow seamen. We come to know about his thirst for the unknown as the novel progresses. Then I began to look for a ship. I should think the hardest work on earth. Now, when I was a little chap, I had a passion for maps. I would look for hours at South America or Africa or Australia and lose myself in all the glories of exploration. At the time, there were many blank spaces on the earth. And when I saw one that looked particularly inviting on a map, then he continues to say, page number 7, or continues to narrate. True, by this time, it was not a blank space anymore. It had got filled since my boyhood with rivers and lakes and names. It had ceased to be a blank space of delightful mystery, a white patch for a boy to dream gloriously over. It had become a place of darkness, but there was in it one river especially, a mighty big river that you could see on the map, resembling an immense snake uncoiled with its head in the sea. Its body at rest carving afar over a vast country, and its tail lost in the depths of the land. And as I looked at the map, of it in a shop window. It fascinated me as a snake with a bird, a silly little bird. It also discloses Marlow's passion for maps and his fascination towards Africa in it. Marlow's determination was followed by his fascination. As he goes to say, I was not used to get things that way, you know. I always went my own road and on my own legs where I had a mind to go. I would not have believed it of myself, but then, you see, I felt somehow I must get there by hook or by crook. So you can clearly see Marlow's fascination towards the map, towards the unknown, towards the mystery, towards jungle. Actually, seas or oceans fail to mitigate his thirst for the unknown and for knowledge, for the new. Marlow's eagerness and promptness to go to Africa also amazes the readers, especially us. If you look at page number 9, you will find it. I flew around like a mad to get ready, and before 48 hours, I was crossing the channel to show myself to my employees and sign the contract. Marlow at the very beginning narrates everything very clearly. Okay, so his acute sense of observation never eludes the ironic state or countenance of Belgian hypocrisy of civilization. As he narrates, page number 9, chapter 1. A narrow and deserted street in deep shadow, high houses, innumerable windows with Venetian blinds, a dead silence, grass sprouting between the stones, imposing carriage, archways right and left. So just continue to go or continue to read. You will find how he has actually delineated the Brussels, the capital of Belgium, the sepulchre city, very acutely and keenly. The doctor also notices Marlow's impatience and uneasiness at the chamber, which clearly describes his eagerness and intensity to go to Africa. As doctor asks Marlow whether there is any madness in his ancestors or predecessors. We do not learn much about Marlow's life before the Congo voyage, beyond the simple fact that he is an experienced sailor who has seen the world, though at the very beginning he is quite different than other sailors who followed the sea differently. So if you move to page number 4 of chapter 1, you will be able to learn. He was the only man of us who still followed the sea. The worst that could be said of him was that he didn't represent his class. And the next page you will find the yarns of seamen have a direct simplicity, the whole meaning of which lies within the shell of a cracked nut. But Marlow was not typical. If he personified, if his propensity to spin yarns be expected, and to him the meaning of an episode was not inside like a kernel, but outside, developing the tale which brought it out only as a glow brings out a haze. In the likeness of one of these misty halos that sometimes are made visible by the spectral illumination of moonshine. So, Marlow is a man of modesty and courage. We come to know about his modesty from his embarrassment at his aunt's praise in Brussels. So move to page 12 of chapter 1. And goodness knows to how many more people besides, as an exceptional and gifted creature, a piece of good fortune for the company, a man you don't get hold of every day. Good heavens! And I was going to take charge of a two-penny, halfpenny river steamboat with a penny whistles attached. It appeared, however, I was also one of the workers with a capital, something like an emissary of light, something like a lower sort of apostle. And we see many examples of his courage, most notably during the attack on the steamer and at Kurtz's escape. At such times, Marlow always keeps a cool head, but in telling his tale or story, he never emphasizes his own daring or heroism. So now, go to chapter 3, page number 15. I tried to break the spell, the heavy, mute spell of the wilderness that seemed to draw him to its pitiless breast by the awakening of forgotten and brutal instincts, by the memory of gratified and monstrous passions. Marlow obviously is an excellent sailor. He enjoys remembering and making us attentive to the technical details and difficulties of getting an old steamboat up a shallow river. And he has always been devoted to work and his own duty. His fondness for work is at the very base of his system or values. Although you may not like work, nobody does, he admits. It is what keeps you sane, just as it keeps Marlow sane in the jungle. So, what provides structure for your life? Marlow suggests. And if you concentrate on the details, you won't be tempted by the call of the madness, wilderness, or the darkness of the unknown that surrounds us. So, go back to chapter 2 again, page number 7 and 8 of chapter 2. I had to mess about with white lead and strips of woolen blanket, helping to put bandages on those leaky steam pipes. I tell you, I had to watch the steering and circumvent those snacks and get the tin pot along by hook or by crook. Marlow is the moral grounding point of the novel. He is the only white man who recognizes the evil of colonialism in Africa. If you look at chapter 1 again, you will find it, find ample example of it. So go to page number 16 and 17 of chapter 1. A slight clinking behind me made me turn my head. 6 black men advanced in a file, toiling up the path. They walked erect and slow, balancing small baskets full of earth on their heads, and the clink kept time with their footsteps. Black rags were wound round their loins, and the short ends behind waggled to and fro like coils. They were called criminals, and the outraged law, like the bursting shells, had come to them, an insoluble mystery from the sea. All their meager breaths panted together, the violently dilated nostrils quivered, the eyes stared stonily uphill. I had seen the devil of violence, and the devil of greed, and the devil of hot desire, but by all the stars, these were strong, lusty, red-eyed devils. They swayed and drove man, man, I tell you. So, actually, after observing their condition, their countenance, their feeble movement, their enchained existence, Marlow doubted whether they were human beings or not. The spectacle of death and enslavement there is overwhelming. If you turn a page, you will find it. They were dying slowly. It was very clear. They were not enemies. They were not criminals. They were nothing up now. Nothing but black shadows of disease and starvation lying confusedly in the greenish gloom. Brought from all the recesses of the coast, in all the legality of time contracts, lost in uncongenial surroundings, fed on unfamiliar food, they sickened, became inefficient, and were then allowed to crawl away and rest. So Marlow's response are not extraordinarily moral, just normal. He is the only normal person amid the diminutive greed of the traders. His patience, perseverance, coolness, common sense, and capability to judge any abrupt situation according to its merit saves him amid wilderness. If you go to chapter 2, page number 14, you will see. Yes, I looked at them as you would on any human being with the curiosity of their impulses, motives, capacities, weakness, when brought to the test of an inexorable physical necessity, restrain what possible restrain. So you keep continuing this fabulous passage, keep continuing to know about Marlow's philosophy. Marlow, as an employee of the company, compares him with Kurtz, though we all know very clearly that Kurtz's mission was different. Kurtz was an agent, and he was actually a plunderer. He turned into a plunderer. He chose savagery. But Marlow, though he is an employee of the company, he doesn't resort to any brutality or savagery. Though he is basically decent and intelligent, he stands for every man in the novel. The ugly truths he confronts and eventually discovers a truth we all have to face. Marlow learns that, like other human beings, he has to acknowledge his own heart of darkness, the call of the primitive in his own nature, the call of the wild. At the end of the novel, especially at the point of rescuing Kurtz for the last time, he says, now go to chapter 3. Page 14 of chapter 3. When he says, and I remember I confounded the beat of the drum with the beating of my heart and was pleased at its calm regularity. So, uh, Marlow's feeling of isolation or alienation is another aspect of the novel. Human beings' primitive existence makes him think like a great philosopher. So you will find some fabulous sentences on his philosophical thought or philosophy. So you go to chapter 2 of page 23. How can you imagine what particular region of the first ages a man's untrammeled feet may take him into by the way of solitude, utter solitude without a policeman, by the way of silence, utter silence, where no warning voice of a kind never can be heard whispering of public opinion? These little things make all the great difference. When they are gone, you must fall back upon your own innate strength, upon your own capacity for faithfulness. As a philosopher, he admits the difficult and sometimes incomprehensive reality on an uncivilized region of earth, the place where we are bound to exist according to its own rules and regulations. So you go to the next page, page 24 of chapter 2. Then the earth for you is only a standing place, and whether to be like this is your loss or your gain, I won't pretend to say. But most of us are neither one nor the other. The earth for us is a place to live in where we must put up with sights, with sounds, It smells too, by Jove, brave dead hippo, so to speak, and not to be contaminated. So, Marlow is a great philosopher, as we have observed. Now, come to Mr. Kurtz. Kurtz, almost from the moment Marlow arrives at the outer station, he starts hearing about Mr. Kurtz. From the accountant, the manager, the brickmaker, and finally from the Russian. First, he hears about Kurtz from the chief accountant of the company, who praises Kurtz. He is a very remarkable person. Further questions elicited from him that Mr. Kurtz was at present in charge of a trading post, a very important one in the true ivory country, at the very bottom of there. Sends him as much ivory as all the others put together. And at the central station, the manager claims they had heard that an important station upriver was in danger and that its chief, Mr. Kurtz, was ill. Marlow tells him he has already heard about Kurtz. Then the manager quickly and rather nervously assures Marlow that he is their best agent. He is an important and exceptional man. Though the manager praises Kurtz, we are going to find later that he really hates Mr. Kurtz. When the brickmaker invites Marlow to his room at the central station, Marlow gets struck by a whale painting in a room. A blindfolded woman carrying a lighted torch. The brickmaker tells that it was done by Kurtz when he was at the central station more than a year ago. The painting is obviously symbolic as it portrays Kurtz, and the lighted torch reminds us of the primary narrator's description near the beginning of the novel of heroic British navigators bearing the sword and often the torch, messengers of the might within the land, bears of a spark from the sacred fire. The woman is carrying what must be the torch of enlightenment amid the darkness of ignorance, but ironically she is blindfolded. Finally, the torchlight has a sinister aspects on or effect on the woman's face. It means Kurtz's process of so-called light has no hope of illuminating the darkness. Kurtz actually pretends to be the bearer of light. So you can see the woman is not blind, but blindfolded. So you can guess how ironic and the symbolic the whale painting is, which indicates Mr. Kurtz's adventure and his exodus. As Marlow was arrested at the painting, he makes a query about Mr. Kurtz. The valuable information Marlow got or gets about Mr. Kurtz from the brickmaker is important for Marlow's discovery. So go to page 29 of chapter 1. He is a project, he said at last. He is an imagery of pity and science and progress and devil knows what else. So continue reading this passage. You will be able to know many things about Mr. Kurtz's nature or what actually the brickmaker has heard about Mr. Kurtz by this time. So as the novel progresses, we hear that the other characters think about Kurtz. So for Kurtz has not been much more than a word to Marlow. And Marlow does something against all his principles, something that makes him miserable and sick. He lies for Kurtz. It is not a gross lie. He just keeps quiet and lets the brickmaker go on thinking that he has a lot of influences in Europe. Here, Marlow becomes loyal to Kurtz because at this point, he has heard nothing but praise for his efficiency and his high ideas. It is ironic. Marlow, the hater of lies, is going to lie for Kurtz. Marlow's obsession towards Kurtz is evident here. He was just a word for me. I didn't see the man in the name anymore than you do. Do you see him? Do you see this story? Do you see anything? It seems to me I am trying to tell you a dream, making a vain attempt, because no relation of a dream can convey the dream sensation, the commingling of absurdity, surprise, and bewilderment in a tremor of struggling revolt, that notion of being captured by the incredible, which is of the very essence of dream. No, it's impossible. It's impossible to convey the life sensation of any given epoch of one's existence, that which makes its truth, its meaning, its subtle and penetrating essence. It is impossible. We live as we dream alone. So Kurtz's existence is very influential and at times very much absorbing for Marlow as well as for others. And Marlow tells us a lot about Mr. Kurtz himself, especially during the long digression that comes just after the attack, a few pages before the end of chapter 2. But Kurtz himself is on the scene for only a few pages. So we learn less about Mr. Kurtz from observation than we do from what these other characters say about him. In fact, Marlow's mind is crammed with Mr. Kurtz before the end of chapter 2. So go to chapter 2, page number 20 and 21. I suppose Mr. Kurtz is dead as well by this time. When actually someone suspects about Mr. Kurtz, Marlow becomes very frustrated and he feels a sense of loss that now it may not possible that he can meet Mr. Kurtz. I had been striving after something altogether without a substance. I could not have been more disgusted if I had traveled all this way for the sole purpose of talking with Mr. Kurtz, talking with. A talk with Kurtz. I made the strange discovery that I had never imagined him as doing, but as discoursing. I didn't say to myself, now I will never see him, now I will never shake him by the hand, now I will never hear him. The point was in his being gifted creature, and that of all his gifts, the one that stood out preeminently, that carried with it a sense of real presence, was his ability to talk, his words, the gift of expression, the bewildering, the illuminating, the most exalted, and the most contemptible, the pulsating stream of light, or the deceitful flow from the heart of an impenetrable darkness. So this particular sentences clearly mentions how actually Marlow is going to confront a person who is full of words and voices rather than a human being of flesh and blood. At first, the suspicion or rumors of Kurtz's death overpowers his mind, as we have already heard it. So eventually, Kurtz is now at that point a voice to Marlow. Even Kurtz's despicable activities is not important or loathsome to Marlow. Marlow now thinks that Kurtz is a gifted creature and his words are the gift of expression. Then before meeting Kurtz, Marlow goes to the end of the novel where he lies to Kurtz's intended. When Kurtz's intended asks Marlow what actually Mr. Kurtz uttered at the moment of his death, Marlow says that her word, her name. So Kurtz is an inseparable part of wilderness which actually engulfs Marlow's mind also and instigates him to hurl lies time and again to the brickmaker and to the intended. Marlow, before the end of chapter 2, reveals the bulk of Kurtz's character as we have already noticed it. And his character is a very possessive one, in fact, overwhelmingly and extraordinarily possessive. You should have heard him say, "My ivory." Oh, yes, I heard him. My intended, my ivory, my station, my river, my everything belonged to him. It made me hold my breath in expectation of hearing the wilderness burst into a prodigious peal of laughter that would shake the fixed stars in their places. Everything belonged to him, but that was a trifle. So Kurtz actually thinks he possesses everything in that region. Marlow's ironic observation of Kurtz's education, which actually makes him think that all Europe contributed to the making of Kurtz. So Mr. Kurtz is a representative of European education and civilization. At Marlow says in page number 24 of chapter 2, in my text of course, the original Kurtz had been educated partly in England, and as he was good enough to say himself, his sympathies were in the right place. His mother was half English, his father was half French. All Europe contributed to the making of Kurtz, and by I learned that most appropriately the International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs had entrusted him with the making of a report for its future guidance. And he had written it too. I have seen it. I have read it. It was eloquent, vibrating with eloquence, but too high. So, here you can see how Kurtz was educated and brought up in the European environment. To Marlow, Kurtz is not a common human being. Actually, after reading report of the African natives, on the African natives rather, the thought of Kurtz soared into Marlow's mind. He is completely obsessed with the thought and activities of Kurtz. It gave me the notion of an exotic immensity ruled by an august benevolence. It made me tingle with enthusiasm. This was the unbounded power of eloquence, of words, of burning noble words. There were no practical hints to interrupt the magic current of phrases, unless a kind of note. Whatever he was not common. He had the power to charm or frighten rudimentary souls into an aggravated witch dance in his honor. He could also fill the small souls of the pilgrims with bitter misgivings. He had one devoted friend at least, and he had conquered one soul in the world that was neither rudimentary nor tainted with self-seeking. And Kurtz is more than a sound, an echo that roams around them in the jungle than a man of flesh and blood. In fact, after all, the build-up Kurtz's appearance may even seem a little disappointing. He never turns out to be as exciting as the unspeakable rights, as we have heard from other characters that he has attended unspeakable rites, gruesome activities amid the jungle with the savage Africans or the cannibals. He is more present in his effect on others than in himself. Some characters, such as the Russians and the intended, are defined almost solely by their relationship to him. So you need to read the relationship of the Russian and the intended to Mr. Kurtz to know Mr. Kurtz's character. Kurtz is a microcosm, a whole in miniature of the white man's failure in Africa. He goes equipped with the finest technology and the philanthropic ideals, but ends up injuring and killing the Africans and stealing their ivory. He virtually reduces technology to the guns he uses to plunder ivory. So Kurtz is a plunderer. We know from the manager that how terribly he has devastated the district. So move to page 5 of chapter 3. In fact, the manager said afterwards that Mr. Kurtz's methods have ruined the district. I have no option on that point, but I want you clearly to understand that there was nothing exactly profitable in these heads being there. They only showed that Mr. Kurtz lacked restraint in the gratification of his various lusts, that there was something wanting in him, some small matter which, when the pressing need arose, could not be found under his magnificent eloquence. So, you know, Kurtz lacks restraint, Kurtz lacks patience, and he actually tries to terrify his opponents with the ornamentations of head that Marlow notices in the central station in Kurtz's own den. And the ornamentation of the human heads reveals Kurtz's intention to terrify people and his thirst for blood. This is another aspect of his brutality and savagery. As he says, page 4 of chapter 3. I told you I had been struck at the distance by certain attempts at ornamentation, rather remarkable. These round knobs were not ornamented but symbolic. They were expressive and puzzling, striking and disturbing. So, Kurtz's intimidation to plunder is another aspect of his characters. Kurtz also shows us the consequence of inadequate self-knowledge, as his report tells us. His journey to Africa, eager to do good and completely unaware of the dark side of his nature, the side that will inevitably respond to the call of the wild, the call of the primitive. Kurtz points up one of the morals of Marlow's tale. If you are not aware of the darkness within you, you won't know to fight it if you ever need to. So, Know thyself is the message of Marlow. You have to know the darkness existing within or in between your own heart. If you do not know it, you cannot handle it properly. You can confront the call of the wild, the call of the primitive. Yes. If Marlow stands for what? Kurtz represents the opposite value, top. And when Marlow confronts him, he is so thin from disease that he seems to be little more than a strong, deep voice. So you will see it if you read properly chapter 3, how feeble Kurtz has become, how tiny his voice has become. His influences on people has come through his eloquent words. One of his colleagues thinks that he would have made a fine radical politician. After all, he could sway individuals by his words. So this comment is also ironic. Actions, according to Marlow, cannot lie. And Kurtz is associated with lies. Kurtz's ideas turn out to be lies when he drops them to become a devil god in the jungle. Thus, as Marlow is drawn to him, he finds himself almost irresistibly lying, and he continues lying even after Kurtz's death. So, we have already told about this, how Marlow lies to Kurtz's intended. But Kurtz has one quality, that even his degradation, he doesn't lose something, that is his conscience or his consciousness. Kurtz recognizes the evil of his action. In fact, as the Russians informs us, he suffers from knowledge, self-knowledge. The other whites in Africa commits act like the enslavement and massacre or genocide of huge numbers of people that they don't even recognize as wrong. Marlow puts his loyalty to Kurtz, who at least is not petty, though he is brutal. The depth to which Kurtz sinks is the measure of the heights he could have risen to. But he is utterly crestfallen as he utters before his death, the horror, the horror. So Kurtz's revelation. So Kurtz's revelation of the horror, of the evil, of the wrongdoings he has done to the African continent makes Marlow actually loyal or become loyal to Mr. Kurtz. So Marlow cannot separate himself to a great extent from Mr. Kurtz, because Marlow's own faith, own observation, own experience is to a great extent entangled with that of Kurtz's experience and observation. Had Marlow not known or discovered Mr. Kurtz properly, he would not have come to a conclusion about the darkness, the symbolic darkness, the dark continent, the dark people, the dark countenance of the people, and finally the darkness that lurks in human bosom or human heart. So if you study and if you read the fabulous syntaxes of Joseph Conrad, if you read about Mr. Marlow and Mr. Kurtz, I think it will help you to understand the novel, The Heart of Darkness, properly. You will be able to answer the short questions and the broad questions properly. So, as I said before, I again request you to read the novel properly. I'm going to bid farewell today from you. Hope you will actually take notice of my suggestions and you will give emphasis to read the particularly fabulous syntaxes or the diction of Joseph Conrad. And the theme of colonization, as we have been a part of colony once. So to us, the theme of colonization is very important. And unless and until you read Marlow's character or Kurtz's character, you cannot understand the theme of colonization or colonialism properly. So the next class, the forthcoming class, would be my concluding class. I would conclude The Heart of Darkness with the portrayals of minor characters. Till then, goodbye. Assalamu alaikum. Take care and stay safe and sound. Thank you again.